I'm your host, Larry, and today we're going to kind of do like a crash course in just like, I got to edit a video. I've got Premiere Pro. It's only needs like basic trimming. How do I do that? What do I click? How do I organize things so that everything makes sense? So that's what we're going to do today. So the first thing we need to do is open up Premiere Pro, and you'll see a screen that's kind of reminiscent of this. If you have an older version, it might look a little different, but in general, there should be a new project button, an open project button, or some little clickies in the middle of your screen, or a pop-up window that looks like this. And we're going to go ahead and click New Project. This has changed dramatically. This used to just be like a little pop-open window. But basically, we're going to name our stuff up at the top the Chupacabra test project. And we're going to just tell it to save. The default's probably fine for most people, but you can determine where you want to save stuff by clicking on this pull down. And then we can import some media or pictures to begin with, which is an option, but I don't always like digging through the file browsers that come from like Premiere or any other software when we can just use Windows to do that in a moment. And then over here on the side, we can do things like we can copy different media from different sources. We can create a new starting folder to import our stuff into, or we can have it create a new sequence, but you might not know what a sequence is. So we're going to do that in a moment. Just name it, and then we're going to hit create so that it'll open up our project file. Now, to start out with, this is kind of messy. Let's go ahead to Window. Let's go to Workspaces, and let's go to the most default learning workspace so that you can kind of get a feel for how to customize your workspace so that things kind of make sense. So this is kind of new for Premiere. This didn't exist when I first started learning this. There's a nice little window here where you can download tutorials and their various like sample footages to learn how to do different advanced things. I totally recommend looking at that if you have access. If not, just don't worry about it. We're going to actually close this panel because I don't really need it. Now, the first thing I like to do is I like to drag my project folder over here. This is like your media bin, as I'd say, like I'd call it. That's where all your stuff that you're going to use to make videos is going to be located. The media browser down here is a tool that lets you search around on your computer for footage to just drag and drop into your import bin. I don't always use that because I typically just put all my media in the same folder and just grab it all, but you totally can. We'll go through that in a different tutorial. So let's grab a couple extra tools before we get started. We're going to want to have some effects. And what these buttons are doing is they're bringing in these different panels that contain different tools and resources that we're going to want. So this is our effects panel. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our effect controls, which will be up here. This will allow us to control different properties of the video, what size it is, where it's located. I'll go over that in a moment. And then we can also grab, what else do I think we need? I think for the most part, that's the basics of what we want. So let's get started. So let's create a bin, and we'll just call this footage. And then I'm going to make another one called brand components. That's going to be important because I like to brand my videos when I put them out onto YouTube, so we'll grab that as well. And let's get started by grabbing our brand components. I have, if this wants to behave itself, a YouTube files section where I've got my video editing templates. This is where I make things like the intro videos. So this is where I've got my intros for my gaming channel, which is what this is. We can click and drag this to the folder icon to create a new folder with all of them in it. And we'll just call this gaming intro. And then we will collapse that. And then we'll hit Control I to import again. And I will go to the tutorial intros and I will grab those as well. Put those in their own bin, call that tutorial intros, collapse that, and now those are ready to go. And then just for funsies, let's go back to my YouTube footage, to my channel graphics, and then let's just grab these low poly backgrounds in case I decide I need them for something. So for footage, let's actually open up a new tab. So anyway, after moving around some footage, let's go ahead and import the footage that I want to work with. So let's go ahead and grab a couple of things. So let's go into my footage. And then earlier, I recorded some instructions on how to edit just your workspace inside of Premiere Pro. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that footage here and then import that. I'm going to give that its own bin. I call that tutorial footage. And I'm going to rename this by just clicking it once and then clicking it twice over the name section. Premiere Pro Workspace Tutorial. And then if I, need to grab that footage for whatever reason, I'll know where it is and I'll know what it's called. Now, something to keep in mind when you import footage into Premiere is that Premiere can't instantaneously play back gigantic raw files because a lot of the cameras that you might work with will just spit out massive files, and that's kind of a pain in the butt. So to get around that, it basically makes its own version of your footage that's much smaller and quicker to play back. And then when you export it, it'll edit a new video using the original source material, so it's high quality. So when you first import this footage, if you're on a slower hard drive, there might be a little bar down in the lower right-hand corner that's processing, that's making a usable preview so that you can preview all the footage that is being imported into the program. So just keep that in mind. On slower machines, this takes a moment for you to be able to use everything that you import. It doesn't take terribly long, but you'll understand and know as you go what it's doing. So the other thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and import some game footage that I've got from my old computer from the game Scorn. And then that'll take a sec to import those files. And there it is. So you can see down here, it's generating files for me to use these longer videos down here in the lower corner. Now that might take a little bit, again, on slower machines, because this footage each one of them is around an hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call these the Scorn footage. And I'll just put that there. That's more gore related, so I'm going to leave that for editing off camera, but I just want to kind of showcase how this little footage thing works in the corner by importing large files. So let's just go ahead and edit this file right here. So to do that, we need to create a sequence. So we're going to go down to this icon here, new item, and click on sequence. So a sequence is just like an editable video file or chunk inside of your timeline. You can put multiple sequences inside of each other to create complex animations or videos or what have you. Generally, when you first boot this up, you'll probably be greeted with the DSLR presets, which is videos that are compatible with a DSLR of 1080p size, which is 1920 by 1080p at 30 frames per second. That might not work for you. That would also depend on entirely what kind of video you want to make and what you want to make it for. Generally, I would say a 1080p at 30 to 60 FPS is a decent starting point. So if one of these presets that you look at and check out these settings doesn't work for you, we can make a custom one just for funsies. So instead, we can go over here to settings, and then we can just click custom editing mode. And then we'll just let's say you at home want to make like a 30 frame per second video. You just click on the 30 frames per second here. I'm going to do 60. And then down here for frame size, I'm going to do 1920 by 1080. I'm going to do just progressive scan, square pixels, 60 FPS. This is a fine color space to work in. This is perfectly good sample rate. All this looks good. And then I will go down here and I will name our first sequence that we're going to create with this. We'll call this, what was I doing? This is the workspace tutorial. Premiere Pro Workspace Setup Guide. And now I can save this preset that I've got here as my basic 1080p preset 60 FPS. And now, at the very bottom, we will have our own custom preset that we can use to work on our stuff that's meant for the web or for whatever. Most players these days don't freak out when you have a slightly different set of settings unless they're like crazy bonkers 240 frames per second that it doesn't know what to do with. So we'll just click OK, and that'll be our starting point. And then I can grab and drag my little footage here down inside of here in order to start editing it. Now, my footage is a little bit bigger than this sequence, so there's a couple of options here. I can change the sequence settings, or I can keep them and then just tweak the footage to fit. That's completely up to you. I can show you how to do that, but we're just going to do the nitty-gritty. We'll just keep the existing settings, and this is going to be a bit zoomed in. So if I wanted to fix that, I'd go to my effect controls and I'd go to scale, and I'd probably type that in at like 75%, and now this fits just fine. It'll be a bit smaller than it was originally, but depending on what you're editing it for, it doesn't matter. Now, the alternative, if that doesn't work, and you want to keep the settings from the original video file that you recorded, say on your phone or on a camcorder, instead of this, I can close this sequence. And instead of using this sequence, I can just delete that. And I can take this footage, drag it to the new item icon, and that'll automatically create a sequence with the same settings of the recorded footage as my sequence. And that might be easier for you. So down here, let's talk about what we got. So we've got two things to worry about. The top half is your video footage. The bottom half is your audio footage. By default, this stuff is all linked together, but if I wanted to get rid of one of the audio tracks because this doesn't have any audio playing, I wasn't showing people how to edit a video, so this audio track here is kind of unnecessary. I can unlink these, delete that, and put my vocal audio up here where the other one was, just to keep things simple. So what I want to do is I want to edit this audio. I want to remove this blank spot in the audio, and then I want to put my branded material at the beginning of the footage and blend it together so it transitions nicely from one thing to the next. So let's start by editing my audio. You probably don't need to do this if you're doing the nitty-gritty version, but I'm going to do it right now anyway, just to show you. It's possible to edit this clip in Adobe Audition, which is Adobe's version of audio editing software. I can go up here. I've got a pre-mixed setting that does my audio editing for me. I save that, and then I can go back to Premiere Pro, and it'll automatically import that audio. Now, if I want to zoom in and out on this work, all I have to do is drag one side of this scroll bar. If I drag it all the way out, it zooms out. If I drag it all the way so that it's a small scroll bar, it zooms in. And you can do that at any side of the scroll bar in order to make it easier to see what you're working on inside your editor. You can also hold control. I think it's nope, that's not quite. There was another, oh, here it is. You can hold Alt and use your scroll wheel to do the same thing, and it'll zoom in wherever your mouse is currently positioned. So you have some options to see what's going on in your viewport, your little timeline editor. So what I want to do is I'm going to bring over my little preview tool, and I want to zoom in on this section here, and I want to trim out this portion where I'm not saying words with my face. I'm not actually sure what was going on here. Seems I was fumbling with something and it didn't make a lot of sense. I was trying to re-enable one of the panels. In fact, I could probably just leave that in there. But that's why you want to preview everything that you're doing before you want to make these edits. So let's just start from the beginning. So at the beginning of these video footages, there's usually a little bit of dead space between the start of the video and when I'm talking. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to just trim off that little empty space there by hitting C. C is my cutting tool. You can also find the tools right here in your tool rack. If you find that these tools are missing for you, you can go up to Window, and then you can grab the tools at the bottom of the window. That'll bring them back for you to grab. What we want right now is the cutting tool, but if you hit V, it might be easier to pull this away from the start of the track, just because it's not up against the wall. And then I can drag it over to where I want to make the trims using this little preview ticky. I forget what these are called, but the little blue preview line where it's currently displaying stuff in the preview window. I'm going to hit C to bring up my cutting tool, and I'm going to trim away this portion here. And then I can grab V and I can drag it away. It's entirely possible that when you're editing, you want to trim something off, but you're not really sure if you want to completely get rid of it. You can just drag it off to the side, decide if you want to keep it later, and then put it back somewhere if you do decide it should be inside of your video. Alternatively, if that doesn't work for you, you can just hit backspace to delete it. Now, if you ever make a mistake, it's actually pretty easy to undo something that you've done. You can hit Control-Z almost an infinite number of times to undo edits that you've made recently. Or you can hit Control-Shift-Z to redo. If you find that you're not quite sure which section of what you've worked on might be where you made a mistake, there is actually something called a history panel right here. The history panel keeps track of all of the edits that I've made, and you can set this up to have way more than just 32 undos. You could have a near infinite number, or like 100. That might be a bit excessive if you're more of an expert, but to begin with, being able to undo things is typically very handy. In this case, the most recent edits are at the bottom. I can click back in time, and it'll go all the way back through here. Now, do note that if I make any changes right now, all of this history will be deleted, and I won't be able to go back forward in time, so just be careful using this tool. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to delete that, and reopen this sequence, because it shut it, because I went back in time before I created it. And I've trimmed the front of this, and let's just go ahead and look in here. I probably don't need this big dead space in the middle of the video, so I'm just going to trim that out. There's a couple different ways that you can trim out footage like this. So the main way that I showed you before is just cutting out a chunk and deleting it after you select it. Instead of doing that, you can make a trim somewhere at the start here, and then grab this portion of the clip and then hover over the cut line. A little drag tool will appear that'll allow you to pull back the front of the clip as if you're slowly erasing it with a little eraser tool, and you can pull it back in the preview window to exactly where you think that edit needs to be made, so that you have a little bit more fine control about where you're stopping and cutting. They both work equally well. It's completely preference. I use both for different reasons. I think it's just useful to know about that, because other editors like Premiere Pro prefer the second method. They don't really do a lot of just hard cutting. So, it's worth keeping in mind. And so now I've made some basic cuts, but I want to like transition between these two portions of the video, because I'm clearly like in here not doing something and then immediately there's like a menu. But I don't want to like just splap a menu in people's faces. I want it to gently blend them together, and I can do that in the effects panel. I can type in cross dissolve, or just cross to find cross dissolve, and that's a video transition. That's just here under video transitions in these various different presets that you can grab. I'm just going to go find my cross dissolve. This is in every version of Premiere since the dawn of time. And what this is it just blends from one clip into the next one using footage from both. Whereas if you went to like dip to black, it would first like fade all the way to black and then come all the way back out to your next section in the clip. And so now if I zoom way in, this is the transition, and it lasts for however many seconds, like a second and a half. And now if I preview up here, it'll fade in that menu, whereas before it was just splapped in, like it just had always existed there. And you can even grab this little preset, so it's highlighted, and you can drag it to make it longer so that it's a smoother blend that takes a longer period of time. Now it kind of blends between, and that might be easier, especially if you're like editing, say, a home video, and you want to go from like the living room to the backyard where you're having a barbecue. A little quick blend is sometimes nice, or sometimes a hard cut. You have options. That's my whole point. And really, you could hand create your own transition effects by simply editing in the effect controls up here, things like scale, rotation, opacity, yourself. Because all these presets is these same settings saved to a little preset chunk that you can slap into the timeline. This is how other editing companies create effect preset packages so that they can sell them to you. There is sometimes a little bit of code involved. You can code to a degree inside of Premiere. I don't really do a lot of that. But the option is there, especially if you're trying to sell packaged products to other creators. So let's go ahead and add the branding to the front of my video. I'm going to hit Control-A to select everything in my workspace. And I'm going to go to the very front of the video. Here is where I want to drag my tutorial intro. One of these is the 2K version, which is what this is. This video is 2,560 pixels by 1,444 or 1440p. And so then like that's 2K, and then like the step above is 3K, and then above that is 4K. It's basically, it's kind of simple, but kind of not. So then I've slapped down this intro here in the front of the video. This will then play and show you like, oh, look, it's the Chupacabra tutorial channel. Oh, it's fancy. And it's good to have, you know, some branded material so people know whose channel that they're currently watching so that you get credit for your work. And then I've got a couple ways of moving this so that it's all butted up with the front of the video and there's no dead spaces. One of them is to physically move stuff. And that works because there's the stuff like snap to, where you'll notice if you drag this around, stuff will automatically snap together so that there's no gap when it goes from playing here to here. There's not like a weird black gap outside of where it dips to black at the end of this intro. That's good. Weird random black gaps in footage is jarring and weird, and people are like, is the video broken? And, you know, whatever. If it's too long, they might leave and not watch your video. It sucks. So there's two ways of fixing that. One is to just let them snap together like that. Sometimes that's a good idea, sometimes not. The alternative is you can literally select the blank space between clips, and you can right-click and ripple delete. Those are considered ripples in the footage that interrupt the viewing experience. And you can just click them and then delete them to make sure everything butts up correctly. And then I would just make sure that everything in your video clip that you've made trims to and removed stuff is where it needs to be, and that you don't have any chunks, if you've been leaving chunks to places that you might use later at the end of your video. I have turned in 5-minute long video clips that were an hour long to my teachers in college because I forgot to delete something back here. It didn't matter, they didn't care, but it can happen, and that can be a bad thing, especially because big videos take up a lot of space on a hard drive. So just make sure that's deleted so that when you export this, it's usable. So the last component here that we'll talk about in the nitty-gritty of the tutorial is how do I get my trimmed up video out of Premiere Pro so that I can share it with my friends and family? And the simple answer is you export it. Some editing softwares, both image and video, allow you to just save as and it'll kick out a usable video. Premiere, if you use the save as tool, all it's going to do is want to save the project file because you can edit multiple different videos in one project file. I tend to use multiple videos in one project file. Some people use like 15 different project files for each individual, you know, video, but you know, it's your choice. But what you need to do to get this out of here is use the export feature. So we go to File, Export. But you have to make sure that either this sequence here is selected or you've got it selected in your bin in order to export that footage. So we go to File, Export. And then we want to export media. So in here, this has also changed dramatically. This export window is where we'll change all of our settings to make sure it's usable for you to put onto basically anything. The world's most universal video format right now is probably the MP4 format, which is also called H.264. Just throwing that out there. If you go up here at the top of your export workspace, here's how all this stuff works. These are the different sections where you can set stuff up. The media file is what you want generally all the time. Beyond that, you can automatically set it up to upload to YouTube. I'll cover that in another tutorial. Vimeo, Twitter, Facebook, Behance, the Creative Cloud, or a custom server. But we just want to, do a basic media file. And then all those settings are going to be over here. So we want this to be called the Premiere Pro Workspace Customization tutorial. And that's going to go to my video export folder. And then I want the preset to be, all of these different formats have their own presets. I can set it to have high quality at 4K, HD, basic HD, or standard def in 480p. Or I can literally, there's a boatload of other presets that Premiere comes with that you can dig through that have different settings from a bunch of different video formats. Everything from H.264 to the Blu-ray version H.265, MPEG, which is more of like a Windows movie file, QuickTime, which is MOV, is an Apple file type, animated GIF, Apple ProRes, which is good if you're using like Final Cut Pro, P2 movie, AVI movies. I think the only thing this doesn't do yet is WebM video, which you might need a converter for. But we're not going to do any of that. If you know a specific file type that you need, look through all of those. You can also grab the specific file type inside of here. Like if we wanted an AVI video that's uncompressed, we could select that. And then there's usually a preset that goes along with it. I just want an MP4 video, so I'm going to go with H.264. So underneath video, I want to make sure that this is 2560 by 1440. That looks good. If you want that to be a little smaller, you can select that. These are a standard 16 by 9 size, and they actually have them all the way up to standard 4K. This one, which is called Ultra HD, is actually considered consumer 4K. I don't know why. It's just what people do. But you can downgrade it if you want. I'm gonna leave it at the higher resolution. You can downgrade the frame rate because some things have specific frame rates that they like. Like broadcast is generally 59.94 is broadcast 60, and then 29.97 is broadcast 30, because they need that like half a frame missing to send data to the TV or something. I'm gonna leave it at 60 because that's what YouTube likes. Progressive's fine, square pixels are fine. And then we can say what type of blending does we want the computer to do to the different frames. Generally, frame sampling's fine. If you find that you're doing like stretching or weird stuff, manipulating frame rates to do like time slowing effects, like you're the slow-mo people on YouTube, then you would maybe want to do frame blending or optical flow to make that look a little less janky. I don't need to do that, so I'm going to ignore that. My performance, I'm going to use hardware encoding. I have an NVIDIA GPU, so I can make the export go faster by using it. HDR graphics, that's fine. In fact, I can boost that all the way up to 81% if I want. And then down here, I want to change my bitrate. So typically, CBR bitrate means constant bitrate. That means your file is always going to have one amount of data that is playing at all times. That's okay if you give it enough space, but that can make your file type gigantic. And you don't necessarily want that, especially if you don't have a huge hard drive just for video editing. So that's what variable bitrate comes in. Variable bitrate uses more data when there's a lot of movement going on the screen and less data when there's not, to save you space. And then if we do a 2-pass VBR, that means it's going to do 1 pass to look at all of the bright spots in the video and a 2nd pass to look at all the dark spots, so it has the maximum amount of quality possible for that image. And then for YouTube, I do about 35 megabits per second to 45 megabits per second. You can leave that at whatever it starts with, just because Premiere will try to match the bitrate of the source footage, try to give you something that looks as good and has the same properties. But I know what sort of bit rates I want, so that's what I'm going to use. Keyframe distance is fine. Video is not in VR. This is going to be going out onto YouTube, so I want this bitrate to be 320 with 48,000 hertz of sample rate. Stereo is fine. I didn't record this in surround sound. You probably didn't either, so you don't need to change this to 5.1 surround sound. The multiplexer should be MP4, or basically, you don't generally need to change this unless you know you need to change this. We don't have captions. We don't really have any effects. It can do whatever it wants with metadata. And then to speed this up a little bit, at home, you can use the video previews that the software generates to make editing go a little bit faster. It can use those same previews to help make exporting go a little bit faster. So I would suggest using that when available. And then you can just export it, which will let Premiere process the video. However, if you use Premiere to export the video, you can't edit other videos in Premiere until it's done. And alternatively, if you want to edit more stuff, you send it to the media encoder, or if you have multiple videos that you want to export, you can send them to the media encoder. And the media encoder is this little tool here. It's basically just a video exporting tool. It just exports and converts footage in order and then sends it wherever it needs to go. And then when it's done, it's done. And you can continue to use your computer for other stuff while it does so. Here, it'll just import all of our settings. I can just going to make sure that it's got my GPU selected to speed up exporting, and then I just click the green arrow to go, and it'll start exporting my video footage so that I can upload it to YouTube and share it with all of you. So that, once it's done, just open up the file that it's in and play it. It's not terribly complicated. If I open up this folder right here and I go to my, would I make an export footage thing? Let's go to space. Yeah, here's my video export folder. Here's another one that I made the other day. Resident Evil 8 tutorial about how to fix issues with that. Oh, was a weird, was there a glitch at the front of that? No, it was just loading. Okay, so anyway, you can preview it almost immediately and listen to how it plays and see how it's doing quality-wise. Can you read all the text? Can you hear all the sound? All of that stuff. As long as it looks and sounds good to you, that's pretty much it. You should be able to put that onto whatever device you want to share it. Most modern TVs handle a generic MP4 video file type. If they don't, you can usually Google it, and it's pretty simple to find out. And then this same tool over here, the media encoder, I can drag this back inside of here, because let's say it's the wrong footage type, right? Like, it doesn't work. This comes with Premiere, by the way. You don't have to buy this separate. I can pause this, and I can say, oh, the MP4 didn't work. Well, I can quickly just go, oh, I actually wanted this to be an AVI, or I needed this to be an MPEG. So I'd select MPEG 2 or MPEG 4, and then it would convert that to MPEG 4. Actually, that's a really small video file type. That's not going to work. I'm going to go to MPEG 2, and then when I continue this, it'll automatically convert that to a different file type so I can use it somewhere else. These tools are relatively nice and easy to use, provided you know what they can do. So that'll be it for this one, ladies and gentlemen. This has kind of just been the rough, nitty-gritty, like, boot camp for Premiere Pro. Get in, do some basic edits, export it, and go. This is like, I got to get this done now. So I hope you found this helpful. I've been your host, Larry. I'm probably going to make more of these videos in the not-too-distant future. Till next time, have a good one. Like and subscribe. Put your questions in the comment section below, and I'll catch you later. Bye, everybody, and have a good one.